Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. In January, Missouri Governor Mike Parson will leave office after 6.5 years. He took over in 2018 after the resignation of Eric Greitens, who'd resigned amid allegations of sexual misconduct and campaign finance violations. Parson would go on to win his first and only full term as governor in 2020. Late last week, St. Louis Public Radio politics correspondent Jason Rosenbaum and STLPR State House and politics reporter Sarah Kellogg sat down with Parson in his state capitol office for an exit interview. A bit later in the show, I'll talk with Sarah and Jason for analysis. But for now, let's get to their conversation with Parson.
You are on the verge of leaving office in early January, a job that you never expected to have when you ran for statewide office in 2016. What are some of your key takeaways from serving in this role?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. Let me first echo what you just said. I think life's journey sometimes has a purpose for you, sometimes that you don't know how it's all going to turn out. So I'm a firm believer in that now after becoming governor, because I thought I was pretty orderly in how my life was structured. Like, I kind of knew what years, what I wanted to do before I was 35, what I wanted to be at 55, about retiring and different jobs I had. And then all of a sudden it just kind of got turned upside down. The way it all happened in this state, the way I became governor. But I think all the years of experience, I think really prepared me for that moment. Not to say I was totally ready for it, but I had a lot of opportunities in life to run a business, to raise a family, to handle challenges that were difficult challenges from many years. And to walk in here, I had experience with the legislative branch, with the budget process. So, you just it is an awakening that you've never experienced when you become governor of the state of Missouri. And I look back on it, nobody has any idea what this job's like till you sit in that chair. I'm just telling you. I'll never be able to articulate it enough what it's like.
Much of your governorship occurred at a time of great national strife, including the COVID-19 pandemic, and that clearly affected efforts to recruit and retain state workers, especially as inflation drove up salary demands. I'm interested to hear how that's affected your day-to-day job as governor, especially if certain problems popped up in various departments because of staffing shortages or turnover.
Well, the state has 47,000 employees, and many of them play a critical role in the day-by-day operation. So it's not like you can send the vast majority of them home or have options. When you look at the Department of Corrections, of mental health, of law enforcement, of all the agencies, social services, all the people that are involved in a day-by-day operation dealing with everyday people, you knew you had to keep that going, So it wasn't a thing that you ever thought about. You really didn't think as much about stopping anything as you did how do you provide the service. That was always the main goal during that time. And I think, first of all, COVID-19, during that time was, without a doubt, the toughest part of the time as being governor of this administration. But I will also tell you it was tough for everybody. Everyday people was feeling the same things that we were feeling here. We just had to be at a much higher level that how we were going to try to figure out how do you govern the state. So the one thing you know from living in Missouri all your life, there's a big difference between Kansas City and St. Louis and Wright County, Missouri. And people think differently, people feel differently, emotions are different, and then you have to figure out what is the right thing to do for everybody in the state of Missouri, and how do you balance that? That become, one of the biggest challenges is how do you do this with a unknown type of disease that nobody knew what was going to happen. I think we all know that now. The think tanks had their theories about trying to give you advice, and that's what it was. They're just trying to give you advice. They didn't know either. And you couldn't go on the internet, couldn't get on Google and say, this is what the steps you do, this is what you're supposed to do. It just wasn't there, to be right honest about it. Every state was different. The way it traveled, the way things happened, who it was affecting. And you just had to deal with that for every day for, I remember coming in the office 42 days in a row, 12, 14 hours a day. Till I remember my daughter calling me and said, "Dad, you got to go home. You just look terrible." And the way it was. But my entire staff that worked was here. We just had to stay the course. So that was the most difficult time, trying to get through that. And then make the decisions you had to make. And you just second-guessed every day from one view or the other, and doing press conferences every day. No governor. You kind of think when you're running for office how you try to get in front of a camera, and then you go through something like that and you're thinking, oh, not today, I just need a break.
Hindsight is 2020, and we now know a lot more about COVID than we did in 2020. Would there be anything you would have done differently with that hindsight?
With the knowledge you have today, yes, in many areas. Once we especially streamlined who it was really affecting. I was, and you guys know this from the region, I said early on, with all the information we had, and I talked to some doctors and some experts, pediatricians, and we were having weekly calls with our emergency rooms all across the state with doctors and everything. One of the things that we knew, that it really was not affecting children, that children were really not feeling the effects of COVID-19 like a lot of people were. And I made that statement one time. Probably didn't do it as elegant as I should have, but I really said that, this is really not affecting children, whatever the words I said. But anyhow, it caused a huge backlash, and everybody says, oh, you're trying to kill kids, you don't care about kids, and all that kind of stuff. And the whole point of it was, as a grandparent and everything, that was, to me, just misjudged who I was and why I would do that. Maybe I didn't say it like everybody thought I should have said it, but the point of it was it really wasn't happening. And if knowing what you know now, you could really target the resources of where you need to go, how you needed to find out where it was going to happen. At the time, we didn't have those resources. And we actually led the nation. When we started doing the wastewater testing, that had never been done anywhere in the United States except right here in Missouri. And that had a lot to do with MU, WashU. A lot of people went together and did that. So, with the knowledge you have today, sure, you would have did things differently, on that. I think the one thing that I am, looking back on it now, one of the things I really think we did, and you can really see that in the economics of the state right now, is make sure and maintain businesses, keeping businesses open, keeping people at work. I think that was a much better decision now, looking back on it, than ever was shutting things down. And I think if you just look at the facts and the data, you'll see the economy, whether it's in different areas that had longer shutdowns, if you look at the education institutions, how much that suffered during that time. And when you look at all that information and education, and I know we don't need to get in the weeds of all of this today to do this, but 85% of the schools in the state of Missouri stayed in session the entire time. When you look back on it, 85%. So, but you take all the big ones, St. Louis, Columbia, Kansas City, and Springfield. Of course, those are big populated schools too, compared to the other 85%. But most of them stayed the course. And we know now that was probably the right thing to do.
One of the notable things about Missouri as you leave office is that the state's had Republican leadership since 2017, and yet by 2025, there's constitutionally protected abortion, legal marijuana, sports betting, expanded Medicaid, and a $15 an hour minimum wage. And right to work, which seemed like an inevitability at the beginning of 2017, was resoundingly repealed in 2018. All of this happened because of the initiative petition process, something that Republicans like yourself wanted to tighten. Is that a sign that perhaps Missourians are not completely enamored with GOP policies, even if they like Republican politicians?
Yeah. Well, here's what I'd tell you about a lot of those, and you can go back through different administrations. We'll have similar stories to talk about because of the initiative petition process, which is what leads us to this. But inaction is what always leads to the initiative petition process. And here's what I would say. If the legislative body don't come up with a solution, and this goes on year after year and is an issue people really care about, sooner or later they go to the initiative petition process and they find a way to fund that. And they go around the legislative branch. I would tell you that the legislative body sure needs to pay attention to that, because what they're basically saying, you're not getting this passed, whether it's conservative or whether it's a non-conservative issue, so we're going to take it upon ourselves to do it. And I've been pretty open about the initiative petition process. I do think there need to be reform to that. But the legislative body, the Republican or Democrat side of it, at some points you got to unite with what it is you believe, and you got to figure out solutions. When you start dividing ourselves up amongst ourselves and you get nothing done, the everyday person out there is tired of that. I'm just telling you. They want you to come up here and do something. They expect you to do something. And I think those are the things you learn setting out from being able to sit in both those chambers and out from the governor's view. Inaction is not a very good plan.
You signed the bill that ultimately banned most abortions, including in the case of rape and incest. For our listeners, at the time, it was basically an 8-week abortion ban, but it had the trigger law, Roe versus Wade was overturned, and then Missouri banned most abortions. Given what happened with voters overturning that, do you have any regrets about signing that bill with the language that was in there?
No, you know what? I've been a pro-life governor my entire life, and far before governor, it goes back to my faith and how I believe that I think everybody should have a right to life, and I just firmly believe that. Is there a terrible situation? Sometimes, yes, but fundamentally, I think the abortion issue in the state of Missouri, much like the country, it's a very divided issue. It's about a 50-50 deal. I mean, even the win on the initiative petition was 51% or something like that, so you got about half and half. What you do learn about the abortion issue, what I do believe, is most people have I want to say their mind somewhat made up on how they feel about that issue. I don't think you change either side very much,
Yeah, and I've heard some of the anti-Amendment 3 people say, well, voters were fooled because of the $30 million ad campaign. I'm not saying money doesn't make a difference, but from talking with people, including people that voted for Trump or for Kehoe and then voted for Amendment 3, it's exactly what you said. Like, their mind had been made up about abortion years ago, and they were not fooled by advertising. They just thought the ban was too strict. So does that punch a hole into the idea that, like, this was somehow an illegitimate victory because of the strategies that the pro side made?
Yeah, I don't know what I call it a victory. I think you're still going to see that battle being fought here in this state. I think we all know that, whether it's going to be fought in the court systems, it'll be fought in the legislative branch again. I mean, there's lots of things that's going to happen after that, and who knows what happens then. But I do think that different things in those issues make a difference to the voters. I mean, you could be pro-life and still say, hey, maybe them restrictions were too much. I mean, you can. Or you may just say that, hey, whatever it takes to protect the life, however that happens, we're here to protect it. And I think that's pretty well the stance I've had my entire life, long before I ever become governor, too. And I need to emphasize that. But look, they did an initiative petition process. People of the state of Missouri voted for it, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, people come in here and dump millions and millions of dollars on lots of issues when it comes to the initiative petition process. And it's sad, but that's the way the system works, is because the action's not done to suit the people.
That's Missouri Governor Mike Parson talking with STLPR's Sarah Kellogg and Jason Rosenbaum. We'll get back to their exit interview in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. In a bit, I'll talk with STLPR's Jason Rosenbaum and Sarah Kellogg for context and analysis of Missouri Governor Mike Parson's 6.5 years in office. But let's get back to Jason and Sarah's conversation with Parson. They spoke last week in his office at the state capitol in Jefferson City.
You ended up appointing 5 statewide officials, all of whom ended up winning full terms to their respective offices, or in Eric Schmidt's case, basically paved his way to tenure in the U.S. Senate. Can you walk us through what the process was like to make these decisions, especially when so many Republicans likely wanted these jobs?
Well, I don't think there's no question you understand when you're governor how political those positions get very quickly, because everybody wants somebody. And, the way I become to governor, which we all know that story, but it was, how do I get the right people to really be public servants like I wanted to be? I wasn't so much worried about everybody's stepping stones, but I really wanted to try to develop who are the people I'm going to put there that I believe is long-term for the state of Missouri. Not so much careers, not so much their political stances, but how do I believe Missouri should be ran in the years to come after I'm gone? So what I really did is I wanted to build a good bench. Picking the next governor is pretty amazing now that you go back and look at that, because at that time we wasn't thinking about that. We didn't know who that would be. But, picking the lieutenant governor, there's lots of other people I could have picked. But one of the reasons I picked Mike Kehoe is because he works. And I do believe he's a public servant. And I do believe he understands the different divisions, the diversity in the state, no matter where they're from. Vivek Malik, picking somebody with an India descent, first minority, Vivek's just a good, hardworking guy.
And I wanted to ask you about that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But I asked you very early in your tenure when you chose Kehoe, why didn't you pick somebody who is not white? Because I'm from Illinois. You can dunk on Illinois all you want, but Illinois has elected many people of color over the years, including the first black president. And you did break that barrier by not only appointing Vivek Malik, he actually won re-election, even though people thought he didn't. You also appointed the first black female Supreme Court judge, and you made the Supreme Court majority women. And I understand, a lot of Republicans don't like these designations. They chafe at talking about race and gender, but you did all those things. And I'd like you to reflect on that.
Because it has nothing to do with the political process. I did them because they were the best qualified people. When I picked Robin to be the Supreme Court judge, I interviewed her. I have all kinds of people that interview judges that are the general counsel interviews them, and they find all their rulings on cases and their background. When somebody gets to come in here and walk to me, I want to know who they are. I want to know who their mom and dads were. I want to know what they've done in their lives. I want to know how they grew up. I want to know who they are that I'm putting on there. So Vivek, Judge Ransom, had nothing to do with the color of their skin, And I know people made an issue out of that, and then even some people say, "Whoa, what are you doing?" But I'm telling you, they were the best qualified people for the jobs, and now they've proved that. Vivek just won by a huge margin because all he did was go work. And if you look at everybody I picked, Eric Schmidt, making him the Attorney General. So when I picked him to be the U.S. Senator, I knew Eric would be a good representative of the state of Missouri. So when he ran for, I didn't pick him for that, but I picked him for the AG.
I was going to say, you're powerful, but the voters made him the U.S. Senator.
Yeah. So make sure I correct that. But when I put him AG, I knew he'd do a good job. But I also understood Josh Hawley went to the U.S. Senate, Eric Schmidt went to the U.S. Senate, and all of a sudden you have a problem in the Attorney General's office of stability. You really did. I knew that internally. I think everybody, the truth be known, knew that created some issues. So when I picked Andrew Bailey, another one I picked, one of the things I told Andrew is, I said, Andrew, I need a commitment that you're going to stay there. I need you to promise me you're going to stay there. And he don't have to commit to that promise. He don't have to do it. But it needed stability. People needed leadership. Whether you agree with every decision or not, he needed it. And then I don't think there's any governor, we just talked about this at the Governor Association, I don't think there's ever been a governor ever pick 5 statewide candidates in their terms of office. That's the first time in the nation that's happened in a 6.5-year term.
Throughout your tenure, your priorities that you've brought up in your State of the State address have been more budgetary as opposed to policy. Why did you take that approach?
Because I knew I could get those things done. Is exactly why. And I knew that they had a more impact on everyday people's lives. Look, I think my chief of staff, Aaron came in here one day, and we talked about this, and he said, okay, and it's so true. It's pretty simple in life. He says, if we start making everything a priority, nothing becomes a priority. So what does our priorities want to be? And when we said they were workforce and infrastructure, so many things connect to that. But we knew most of that could be done through the budgetary process. We didn't need a lot of legislative action because, the legislative branch has their thing to do, and they get through those things and try to pass bills and so forth, but that really wasn't what I was after.
Do you think that kind of speaks on how the legislature works, and that with a supermajority in both chambers and the governorship, that you focus on stuff that you knew could get done through budget versus policy? For example, your bill you wanted for childcare didn't pass. I'm just kind of curious, do you think it tells the state of how this building is working right now?
And also, just as an add-on to Sarah's question, was it also easier because you had billions of dollars of federal money that your predecessors didn't have?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that helped. I mean, that kind of money coming from the federal level. But what the key to that was, Jason, is how do you spend the money? And if you just spend the money on all kinds of programs, the point of it is how do you invest that money is what we were always trying to figure out. What was the best thing that was going to last? For example, if you're going to spend it on mental health, okay, how do you add more mental health facilities? How do you add more bed space? How do you add more programs that you really can sustain? Not just a one-time flux of money and then the program's gone in a year or two. So I think that was one thing that we really tried to do with that money. But did that help? Sure, it helped. In a lot of areas, we were able to use that for different things.
I'm going to circumvent back to my question. Do you think the fact that you emphasized on budgetary, with supermajorities kind of was an indication of how this building is working or not working right now?
Well, I don't think there's any question. Look, I've said in every branch, the House and the Senate, there's always going to be friction between the legislative branch and the governor's office, no matter who the governor is, and no matter who the legislative branches are. I mean, we've had supermajorities, and really not to get some basic fundamental things reformed or done is not a good sight for us. I mean, it's not a good look. Not doing initiative petition reform. And now we see what happened. We didn't get it done, and it kind of come back and bit us. And that's really the truth of it, because we didn't do anything. Because somebody wanted to do a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. At the end of the day, you got nothing. So those are the things that I've learned a long time ago that you figure out. How do you really get the things, and how do you get the majority of the people to support something? Daycare is an issue. I guarantee you the General Assembly will have to deal with that issue. And I hope Governor Kehoe, I've already talked to him about it. It is the number one issue for people in this state, and there's a 65% desert areas in our state. It's the number one reason people don't go to work. So I'm not saying government's got to take that over, because I don't believe that. But I do believe there's opportunities for us to partner with businesses and find avenues to help kids.
There seems to be a perception among people in St. Louis that state government is more of an adversary than a partner, and I'm sure you're going to point to ways where it has been a partner, but I can bring up a recent example, the whole situation with the St. Louis County prosecutor, which I know is in court, and I know you may have to be careful what you say here, but I could see a lot of people in St. Louis who are more Democratic than Republican being like, this is an example of the state trying to impose its Republican values on a Democratic area. I know you encounter that a lot. I'm sure Governor Kehoe may encounter that more. Like, how do you thread the needle to where you are a workable partner but are not so overbearing that you don't let St. Louis or St. Louis County do what the people want them to do?
Yeah, well, which is a good question, which brings back, what do the people of St. Louis County want, in this situation that you're put into? I don't think there's any question. I've spent a significant amount of time in this administration in St. Louis. We've probably had some of the largest budgetary items ever for the St. Louis region when it comes to businesses, when it comes to workforce, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to helping the Urban League. I know we've worked very closely with them up there. It kind of goes back to the city prosecutor, and here's why I believe it is our place to do this. As we've seen what happened in the city and how dysfunctional that was, I couldn't tell you today whether Gabe Gore is a Democrat or Republican. I don't know that answer, nor did I ever ask that. All I knew, he was a qualified candidate that more than anything, he loved the city. He wanted the city to do well, and he wanted to do that. I think to put in a charter, I'll say this, but I'll let the legals fight that out. St. Louis County in a charter, because Sam Page told me that, he says, well, it says we have to have a Democrat, to take that position when it become open.
Yeah, similar to St. Charles, where they had to have a Republican to replace Tim Lomar. But continue.
Yeah, but same thing. But what I'm saying, why does that even have to be a Republican or Democrat? Why do you not just put the best candidate in there to be a prosecuting attorney? Is what was my whole point to that, which if that's what they want to do, but then again, is the charter supersede the state, which is going to be the question. Because for me, I interviewed 3 people yesterday, final candidates. They were excellent candidates, but none of them I could tell you what their party affiliates were.
Was one of them Court Van Ostren?
What's that?
Was one of them Court Van Ostren who, Sam Page is trying to appoint?
No. Oh. He didn't apply. I don't think he applied, but let me verify that for you.
Understood.
Yeah.
I remember in 2015, after Tom Schweik died, that you made a very memorable speech about the discourse in Missouri politics and how things needed to change. We went through the first 2 years of the Greitens administration. The discourse was terrible. And there have been points during your tenure where it's not been great. I understand politics is a difficult business. We're never going to get to a point where everyone loves each other. But I want you to reflect on whether things have gotten better from a discourse level from when you made that speech.
Yeah. One of the things when I made that speech, I was disappointed, I was hurt of being part of the process, and we had stooped to where we're talking about somebody's looks, where we're talking about somebody's, you're trying to destroy somebody's honor and character in politics. That's not what it was ever about. If you want to destroy somebody's record, if you want to talk about things they've done, I get that. We all get that. It's a tough arena, and you better be a little tough if you're going to jump in here, especially at the higher levels you go. But I don't believe what happened to Tom Swight was right. Do I think that's the reason he committed suicide? No, I don't know all those reasons. But the politics that you see, even in the United States right now, are probably as dysfunctional as you're seeing it. Now, hopefully there's a new administration, there's a whole new feeling that things are going to change. But you don't have to destroy one another to win an office. You sure don't in Missouri. Let me break it down to Missouri. If you want to run against somebody, run against them. But to come up with things that are occurring today, like people sending letters out against politicians, say they had an affair 2 days before an election, that is totally untrue. Why are we doing that? If you can't stand on your own 2 feet and win on your merits to a certain degree, why is the first thing you got to do is try to destroy your opponent to win an office? We got that backwards. I get telling the differences all day, but both sides have just went overboard on that. Has it got better? Some areas I would say yes. There's still the ones out there that you have that people just try to destroy one another's character and their honor. You work a lifetime for that. You work a lifetime for who you are. And when people start attacking that, I don't care. Yeah, you put your name, you paid your money, you're a politician, suck it up, you're supposed to take it. But I will tell you, you don't have to take that. And people can have their say about that, of what it is to do on that. So hopefully they learn a lesson. Hopefully I've tried to set a better example since I've been governor. I don't personally go out there and look to attack people, but sometimes you do have to call people out when they do things that is not right.
How do you want to be remembered as the 57th governor of Missouri, and what do you plan to do next?
Well, let me tell you this. I'll let the history of the state decide what I was like for a governor. I really hope, I really do. I hope that people says, hey, he did a pretty good job when he was there. I'm good. I'll be content with that. I'll be happy with that. And there's nothing that I know I need anybody to slap me on the back and tell you how wonderful you are anymore. I've kind of played my time in life to get to be able to do a lot of things. I've been fortunate to be able to do them. But I think the idea is just, I hope, that once upon a time, somebody had to settle this state down. Somebody had to be the captain of the ship, and somebody had to get us on the right track. And I think that will be one of the things that they'll remember about this. And like I said, if somebody says I did a pretty good job, I'll be content with that. And your other part of the question?
What are you going to do next?
There's a couple of things. One, I want to go home, and I'll be honest with you, I want to take a little 5-year-old granddaughter to school like a normal person, like a normal grandparent. I want to do some of that. I don't have any plans. I don't want to be in the political arena anymore. I have no desires to stay in that. There is one thing I am going to do, and I'd love to talk to you about someday. I'm going to start a foundation called the 57 Foundation. Imagine the name, 57 Foundation. But the one thing I've learned in 6.5 years, there's lots of programs for veterans, homeless veterans, for mental health issues, for people without jobs. There's different ways to pick them up. But there's a gap there that I think we miss. There's the single mom out there with 2 kids that's working and has 2 jobs. And maybe they just need a set of tires for the car. Maybe somebody just needs daycare for 30 days, but they're still working. Maybe somebody needs a little help with the utilities that don't qualify for any other programs. But one of the things I want them to do, I want them to be working, I want them to have jobs, and I want to just be able to help them. And I know so many people across the state that can share that information with me to just tell me who those people are. And then, so I'm going to do that foundation. Not that it's going to be full-time, but it's just one of the little things I want to do because there's a certain amount of people out there that will go to work every day, working their butts off, trying to make a living, trying to pay the bills. And every once in a while, they just maybe need something for 30 days. Maybe they need the insurance paid for 6 months. I don't know what it is, but those are the kind of things I'd like to do when I get out.
Thank you, Governor, for your time.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's Governor Mike Parson talking with STLPR Sarah Kellogg and Jason Rosenbaum in the governor's office at the state capitol late last week. Parson will leave office in January after 6.5 years as Missouri's top executive. When we come back, Sarah and Jason will join me for context and analysis of Parson's time in office. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Before we talk with STLPR's Jason Rosenbaum and Sarah Kellogg about the reaction to their talk with Governor Mike Parson, we want your help. Early this morning, St. Louis Public Schools Board of Education released a report by a private accounting group showing that the district's now former superintendent, Keisha Scarlett, misused district funds and violated hiring protocols. That story is up now on our website at STLPR.org. While Scarlett has denied any wrongdoing, we want to know how residents of St. Louis, particularly teachers and parents, are reacting to the report. You can contact our education reporter, Hiba Ahmed, with your thoughts. Email Hiba at news@stlpr.org. That's news@stlpr.org. Here with me now are Jason Rosenbaum and Sarah Kellogg to reflect on Governor Parson's 6.5 years in office. Jason and Sarah, welcome back to the program.
Hi there.
Thank you.
So, Jason, before we get to your and Sarah's reactions to what the governor just said, can you briefly remind us of how Parson came into office?
He came into office very unexpectedly. I remember talking with Parson after he became lieutenant governor, even before, and he was like, if I win this is going to be the last road on my political journey. Well, it wasn't, because Eric Greitens imploded in 2018 due to a torrent of scandal, and he became governor on June 1st, 2018. I think that I bring this up all the time, but when I first met Governor Parson, when he was Representative Parson in 2007, not only did I have no idea he would be a future governor, he had no idea. Like, Missouri politics sometimes works in mysterious ways.
Right. And so, Sarah, Parson becoming governor in 2018, it was a position, as you noted in your interview, and that Jason just noted too, he did not expect to be in that place. What stood out to you in what he said to you and Jason as he prepares to leave that office?
I think what struck me is how in a way content I think he was with how he ran Missouri, how he was governor of Missouri for 6 years. That really struck me. I mean, we asked him kind of like, would you think you would have done this better, and or what are your thoughts on this? And I think that a lot of times his answer was, especially with the COVID answer, I think it was like, I wish I would have maybe said this differently, but not really policy-wise. So I think he's pretty self-assured of how he ran the state. Mm-hmm. That really struck me. And I think that another thing that struck me especially was talking about priorities and how he did budget priorities, because he knew those could get done when, in all, again, Missouri has a supermajority of Republicans in both the legislative and then, as a Republican governor. So I think that was really interesting because it shows kind of how not functioning the legislature is right now. Those are kind of the biggest things that struck me from that interview.
Yeah. I mean, what Sarah's just said, Jason, do you share the same sort of things as far as standouts, or was there something else for you too?
The thing that I kind of thought about, especially when listening to the interview and doing the write-up, is how he did have to deal with a lot of frustrating conflicts with the right flank of his party, but he won most of them. He won most of them when it involved legislation he wanted or appointments he wanted to make. All of his appointments to statewide office eventually won full terms or won election to other offices. Even Vivek Malik, who a lot of Republicans thought had no chance of winning a full term, possibly because he was not white, and there was an assumption that Republicans would not embrace a non-white statewide candidate. He won pretty decisively, and then he won even by a larger margin when he ran in the general election. That being said, he also said that the disappointment was not tightening the initiative petition process and making it harder to amend the state constitution, which he chalked up to, I think, Republican infighting. And I think that really was a consequential non-decision.
I think that was absolutely a point that he was making too, is like a lot of the priorities didn't get through because of the legislature, whether it was tightening the initiative petition process. They were unable to get through policy legislation dealing with child care last year, which was a priority of his. That was because of Republicans, because a faction of Republicans and Democrats were absolutely behind that. So I think a lot of the infighting he also, I wouldn't say, passed the buck to, because he, had some say in that, but definitely said like the legislature was a big part of why this didn't get done.
Mm-hmm. And so how does that affect his legacy, all of that infighting, Jason?
I think it's just going to be a standard fare of Missouri politics now. The reality is this isn't the same Missouri environment that he entered in 2005 when, Republicans were in charge of state government and the legislature, but not by huge margins. And the state still was somewhat even on a statewide level. That's not the case anymore. In many respects, Missouri has become sort of a mirror image of Illinois, where Democrats control everything there, Republicans control most everything here, and there's going to be factions that are going to fight with each other because of just how many Republicans there are and just how big the tent has become.
Mm-hmm. No, Sarah, when both you and Jason asked Parson the question about legacy and what he hopes it'll be, he said he'll let the history of the state decide. But then he also added that if people remember him as someone who settled things down and got the state on the right track, that he'd be happy with that. Now, the right track, certainly, that's subjective. But what do you think his legacy is going to be?
I think part of his legacy is definitely going to be his appointments. As we said, he made pretty much a historic number of appointments to statewide positions. We're talking an attorney general that then became a U.S. senator, followed by another attorney general. He picked Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, who is now Governor-elect Mike Kehoe, and you have to wonder whether or not, if he had picked Kehoe, if he would have become governor, because he had that, bigger position. So I think a lot of his legacy is also who he kind of picked to take on the job after he left. I think it's going to be a big part of his legacy for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I understand, Sarah, that after your interview with Governor Parson in his office last week, there was someone waiting outside, and that was Mike Kehoe.
Absolutely.
Who is, as you mentioned, is the now governor-elect, and he'll be inaugurated on January 13th. In what ways do you think that Kehoe's governorship might be similar to or different from what the state experienced under Mike Parson?
I think it's probably the closest thing to a continuation that you would have gotten from the people who were running for governor on the Republican side, but I don't think it's going to be an exact kind of continuation of what maybe Parson would do. I think Kehoe is going to emphasize more on policy that he wants done. I mean, he mentions day one he wants to get a crime bill on the floor and passed, and I think the past terms he has served as lieutenant governor means he's overseen the Senate, and he might have closer relationships with how the senators are working now. That might play in his favor. That may be a disadvantage because he might be butting heads with others. But I do think he's going to have a more policy-focused tenure than Parson did, which I said really was more budgetary.
Okay. Any headbutting, Jason, on your part with Sarah and what she said?
Not really, but I do think one of the other key differences is because Kehoe has lived in Jefferson City for so long and has kind of seen firsthand the atrophying of like the state government workforce under COVID and how underpaid they are. I think that he may have a little bit more sensitivity to trying to get them paid better, trying to manage some of those departments better. Like, let me be clear, managing Missouri state government is a really, really difficult job, no matter who the governor is. It was especially difficult post-COVID when the demands for salaries went way beyond what they were, and people started quitting because they didn't want to either go back to the office, or they realized that their jobs were frankly not what they wanted. That's not really the environment that we're in right now in Missouri, but there's still some major pay disparities between where state workers are compared to the private sector and even other governments. And I think Kehoe will be more sensitive to that, whether he can actually accomplish that, given that the budgetary situation is not going to be as robust as it was during Parson years. I think that's going to be a major challenge for him.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, overall, Sarah, is there anything, based on all of your time interviewing Parson, maybe not just the exit interview, but those past opportunities too, how might Parson's legacy not align with what he hopes it will be?
I think for any governor that was running or that was governing during this time, COVID is going to be a huge mark on any governorship, and I think it will be on his as well, whether or not, for example, there weren't any mask mandates or business shutdowns in Missouri. It was nothing statewide mandated. He says that was the right decision. Time will tell if that was the right one. I think that that's going to be a huge mark on his legacy, whether or not it'll be looked upon favorably or against. We're still too soon from that, I think, to really tell, but I think that'll definitely be kind of a big part of his legacy.
Mm-hmm. Sarah Kellogg is STLPR State House and Politics reporter, and Jason Rosenbaum is politics correspondent and the host of the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Thanks to both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's episode was produced by our executive producer, Alex Hoyer.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.